If you're applying for disability benefits or help people that are, the path to success has never been more complicated. Welcome to the Disability Expert Podcast, where we tackle the difficult issues and interview the country's top experts to help you better navigate the disability process. Winning a disability case is hard and keeps getting tougher every day. We can't promise you'll win your case by listening, but we sure think it's going to help.
This really isn't that complicated. I mean, you want to win your case, don't you? Well, then listen to what I say.
Hi, welcome to the Disability Expert Podcast. I am your host, Chad Brown, and I am so excited today to have with me my guest, Jonathan Ginsberg. Jonathan, thanks for coming on the show.
Glad to be here. Nice to see you again, Chad.
The first question people watching this ought to be asking is, who are you, Chad Brown, and why are you on Jonathan Ginsberg's YouTube channel? We came here to hear Jonathan tell us great information about disability, and all of a sudden we've got somebody we don't know. So thank you so much just for agreeing to do a show with me.
Sure.
Putting a show out on your YouTube page. For people who don't know, Disability Expert Podcast, I'm a board certified disability expert, disability attorney, many years. Jonathan and I have been friends for a long time. And we created a podcast to do two things. One, to put quality information on the internet to help people navigate disability claims, and to highlight the lawyers in certain parts of the country, around the country, that people should be working with. We started my podcast because, by and large, I'm of the opinion that most of the information on the internet for disability is not very good. It's not accurate. It's created by marketing companies and now by AI. But there is one shining exception to that, and that is Jonathan's YouTube page. If you look at sort of the history of it, I think the YouTube page is at SSD Attorney. Your webpage is ssdanswers.com. Obviously, you're an attorney in this space, been here a long time. You really meet both qualifications. So when we were looking for guests and thinking about who could come on the show, immediately thought of you because you're already doing what I'm hoping to do. And so for your subscribers and people who watch your YouTube page, we're going to do a two-part episode. First part is going to be on your YouTube page, and it's going to come out, and we're going to go through some great topics today. And then the second part of our episode is actually going to be on the Chad Brown Law YouTube page at CB Disability Law. And so we're going to do a collaboration. So thankful for you for that. We got a bunch of topics to talk about today. I'm really excited about them. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about your YouTube page. So I went back and watched your first YouTube video last night.
Oh, no.
March 17, 2014, 11 years ago, the role of the vocational expert in the disability process, which is so funny because we just shot an episode before today. And I actually interviewed Maria Vargas, who's a vocational expert, longtime vocational expert. But there you were, 2014.
My hair was dark. Not any wrinkles. And all.
Why in the world did you start a YouTube page? Like, can you just tell us a little bit about how'd that come about? How'd you start a YouTube page?
Yeah, long story short is, I had sort of I always enjoyed technology. So when websites became a thing, and this is kind of dating me, I was the first person in Atlanta to have websites. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. And for a number of years, it really helped me generate a lot of business in multiple practice areas. And then all the big legal publishers kind of came about, and they started generating websites for people. A lot of them weren't very good, but it kind of made it much more difficult to break through the clutter. And of course, money started becoming a big issue. People were paying to get on top, to the top of the search engines. So it sort of became obvious to me that, relying on SEO, search engine optimization, or websites was really going to become less important. I've always been kind of interested in video. I'm a photographer, amateur photographer. I was one of those crazy kids with a Super 8 camera, and I would edit film, literally splicing it. And so I just, I had a couple video cameras from the times my kids were young. And so I just said, let me just see what happens, put them up there. And lo and behold, and the first ones are really, really not very good. I remember the lights I had fans in them. So you hear this terrible fan noise, and the microphones weren't any good. It was pretty brutal looking back, but nobody else was doing it. And so, I started getting some results. And of course, back then it was before COVID, obviously long before COVID. And, I really wasn't able to do much with a lot of the people that would reach out to me other than just refer them along. But I just kind of enjoyed it. I started doing more and more of it. And I found that, you kind of find a voice in terms of the way I approach it, the way I talk to people, very much about, when I'm talking to somebody on YouTube, it's one-to-one. I'm not talking one-to-many. And I think a lot of lawyers, when you look at their videos, they tend to have this very general, I call it water is wet content. They just sort of talk
Yeah.
about, we fight for your rights and, we're here for you, get us on your team. That's a bunch of BS, quite frankly. I mean, the bottom line, somebody comes to YouTube, they want a solution to a problem. How do I, what are the tricks I see that judges might, trick questions the judge might ask, or why is the vocational witness there? So really just answering the questions that people were asking me in my practice. And then it just kind of took off and kind of took on a life of its own. And, 400 videos later, here I am. I live stream every Wednesday night at 8:30 Eastern, if anybody's interested in that. And it's just, I just sort of became the video guy, and I really kind of like it. I mean, it's, my setup is pretty simple. It's not real complicated. I don't go for all the B-roll, the complicated stuff. It's just me talking to people out there one-on-one. And it just really kind of fits my personality. And it just seemed to have really, hit a nerve out there. So that's how it came about.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere. YouTube says you have somewhere north of 500 videos, so more even than you think.
Oh, was it?
What have
Okay.
you,
Okay.
what have you learned in that? I mean, that's a really broad, probably bad question, but like you've been doing this for 11 years. I mean, you're consistent. You can't get to that level of video, and they're real videos. They're not AI generated. I mean, it's you engaging with real issues. Like, what have you learned over those 11 years in putting out this sort of weekly content for folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing is really to answer questions that people have. They're practical. In other words, Social Security, you pointed out in your a couple minutes ago, a lot of bad information out there.
Yeah, for sure.
And this is very much a practical area. I know, as you know, the definition of disability for Social Security is whether you have the capacity to be a reliable employee. It's about employment capacity. But if you look at Social Security's website, a lot of the stuff out there, nobody talks about that. So if you want to win a case, you have to really focus on the vocational issues, the specific vocational issues. For example, one of the things I talk about to all my clients, and I discuss this on the videos kind of ad nauseum, is you have to be specific. How long can you sit? How long can you stand? Not very much or not too long is not a good answer.
Sure.
So just answering questions about and really talking about those specific things. What I've learned from judges that are nice, the judges that are not so nice. I know you did a video about kind of judicial attitudes, but just knowing what to expect from the judges. There are certain questions that every judge asks every time.
Yeah, sure.
There's no reason somebody should be surprised about it. So just things like that, things that I would want to tell my clients, I'm telling people in a video context, because it's really the same thing against one-to-one. And I think it's really important to share what you know. I'm a big believer in good karma. You put good stuff out there, good stuff comes back. I've made a lot of friends, yourself, a lot of other people out there that I've never met in person. Hopefully we will someday, but never met in person. But, just people that I've brought onto my YouTube channel, my live streams, my podcasts, things like that. And it's just a good way to establish a knowledge base out there for people who really don't have any other place to turn. And again, there's some other people who do videos. Some of them are pretty good. Some of them are not so good.
Yeah, sure.
But I want to tell, what I know, share what I know. As you and I have discussed on many occasions, this is a practice area where people are usually open to sharing. They're not, it's not proprietary. It's not like that competitive, because there's plenty of business out there. And, you want to just share what you know, and you collaborate. And it's a very collaborative community amongst lawyers. I interact with a lot of lawyers. I don't know something. I'll put it on a listserv, and 5 or 6 people will respond to it. I respond to questions. So it's really, I think, a good area, because I think a lot of people who do this recognize that, we're serving a population of people that really don't have a great source of information. You can't watch a hearing. I mean, they're private, they're closed. So there's really no way to know what to expect other than to have people like me and you tell them what to expect. So that's really what I've learned. It's just, it's about sharing what you know, not holding back, not giving kind of the generalized, doesn't mean anything information. My videos are, 8, 9, sometimes 10 minutes, but they're full of, really meaty content. That's really what I try to do.
Yeah, I think that there's sort of this misunderstanding, the disability process is non-adversarial.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I've always sort of viewed it it feels adversarial, and there really is sort of a common enemy to our client, which is the Social Security Administration, which sometimes does a good job and sometimes does a bad job, and there's good judges and bad judges, and we're going to talk about some of those things. But I really have always just thought it was great that you put the information out there, because basically you're saying, let me help people, because that's what this space is ultimately about. When you get to the crux of most people who are doing this, they could make more money doing something else. They could be in other practice areas, but we're in this space because we genuinely want to help people. And what better way to do that than to say, hey, I'm going to tell you everything I know, and I'm going to help you. And if you need me to help you, come on, I'll help you.
Yeah.
But if you
No,
find
look,
somebody else, great. And that's sort of the basis of our podcast and what you've done. So a lot of perfect.
No, look, I mean, I get emails from people that say, I won because of what I saw on your YouTube channel. I'm like, that's great. Leave me a nice review. Some people can do it themselves. If you have a, really severe, God forbid, severe, life-limiting illness, you may not necessarily need an attorney. And so if you can learn what to do on your own, good for you. I have no problem with that at all. There's plenty of good cases out there for me. And like I said, if you can help somebody, it's just the right thing to do. And again, I want to make a living out of this, but on the other hand, you want to make sure that, you share what you know. That's where we're put on this earth, I think, to help others. And I don't want to get too, touchy-feely about it, but that's kind of the way I look at it.
Well, let's get into some issues then, because it's interesting. I want to talk about, on this episode, we're going to talk about a couple of things. One, I want to talk about some of the biggest factors that go into why people win cases. I'm going to tell you something you probably don't know. I want to talk about age, because I personally think the judge is the most important factor, but age may be the most important factor. But your site, gridrules.net, I'm going to tell you this, like for years when I had to use the grids in hearings, like I'd pull it up because it was so easy to use. And for what our listeners may or may not know, the grid rules basically look at the differences between people's ages and how they impact their ability to get on disability. But like when you put that out there, like I knew who you were initially just because I use gridrules.net like 3 or 4 times a week to be able to go in and just pull up the listings and easily see what the impact was. So let's talk about that. How does age impact disability claims? Why is it important? What do people need to understand? Because age is a big deal.
It's a really big deal. And I think that, again, I think other than the judge, which you have no control over, and I guess you don't have control over your age either.
Yeah, sure.
But I think that age is really, really important, because when you hit age 50, there is a bias in the Social Security system in your favor. If you have physical impairments, then the grid rules apply. If you don't have physical impairments, in other words, something like depression or anxiety, you can't use the grid rules. But you still have that bias, because Social Security realizes that those of us over age 50, and I'm just barely over age 50, as you can probably see, I wish. But when you're over age 50, Social Security realizes there's very, very difficult to get a job, to find something in a new area, to do something physical. If you are 57, 58 years old with a couple of herniated discs and some other significant medical problem, it's going to be hard to find a job. So it's a very practical recognition that, again, those over age 50, then at age 55, hard to find a job. So you start out with, if you're over age 50, you have a built-in bias. And I think that I've had judges even say that on the record to me at hearings as well. Social Security, really has I don't think they use the word bias, but sort of has an inclination to approve people over the age of 50. Right. So yeah, 50 is sort of that break point. And the grid rules, as we talked about in the website I've got, is gridrules.net, where I basically took the grid rules that are in a, kind of very buried in a code, very hard to read. And there's one thing that, if you look at the original grid rules, it'll say like DO. Stands for ditto. They abbreviate the word ditto. It makes no sense. But anyway, so I took the grid rules and I created a website called gridrules.net, where it's really easy to kind of track them. I gave some examples of how they work. But yeah, age, I think, is a really, really important factor. I've never seen statistics about this, but I suspect that if Social Security has them, the percentage of approvals for people under 50 versus over 50, and then over 55, it goes, probably at about maybe under 50, maybe 35%, at 50, between 50 and 55, maybe 52, 53%. Over age 55, it's probably 70%. It's that big of a difference. So, I tell people sometimes, and I would tell, folks watching this, if you're thinking about applying for disability and you're 49 years old or 48 years old, if you can hang out till 50, your chances of winning go way, way up. So
Right.
it's really, really an important factor.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that the grid rules sort of highlight and that people need to understand is that I get people on disability all the time that can work, but they're not required to because they're limited to certain types of work based on their age. And so
Yep.
you get into like when you're helping someone disability case, like the definition of disability matters. And
Yep.
the reality is that because of the grid rules, the definition of disability changes
Very good
as
point.
people hit different age plateaus. And I think
Yep.
when you understand that, then it's a lot easier to understand how to position your case in front of an ALJ, which is the thing I want to talk about next. But before we do that, if we take a quick break from our sponsor, CBIG.
Hey there, this is Kevin Rosenquist from the Disability Expert Podcast. Every week, Chad and his guests discuss the disability process and how expert attorneys help their clients obtain the Social Security disability benefits they deserve. But obtaining disability benefits is only half the battle. After winning your disability case, understanding Medicare should be your top priority, and that's where CBIG comes in. Disabled individuals must get their Medicare coverage right. Trying to understand Medicare can cause anxiety, uncertainty, and even fear. CBIG works with Medicare beneficiaries on disability around the country and is committed to helping those on disability navigate the complex Medicare process. Visit cbigcares.com today to see how CBIG makes Medicare simplified. Mention this ad and receive a free gift when you schedule a 10-minute consultation.
Okay, we are back and we have heard from our sponsor, CBIG, and we are back with Jonathan Ginsberg, who is talking about all things disability. And we have spent some time talking about age as a factor, which I personally think is probably the second most important factor. I think the ALJ is the most important factor. But you said something in our last segment that I think was probably correct, even though you corrected yourself, which was to say some judges say they have a bias. I personally think all judges have a bias. I think the idea of a neutral judge to a hearing is sort of a myth. I know that most of the ALJs would probably slam their hand on the desk and say, well, certainly, Mr. Brown, I'm unbiased when I come to these cases. But the reality is most judges have presuppositions about who they think is or isn't disabled based on not specifically for that individual, but based on broader categories. And one of those is age. One of those factors where if you look at a judge who has an approval rating of 65%, that judge has got to pay a lot of cases over 55. They have to. Yep. Because they can't get to that approval rating if they don't, or if another judge has an approval rating of 35%, then they're clearly not paying as many of those cases when they're older. So what's the takeaway from that? I think the proper takeaway is judges have biases. I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing. I think we all have biases in different capacities, and judges have to make complex decisions with a lot of different facts. But I think understanding that judges maybe aren't neutral, and they have the phrase you use is mental models for cases. I know. Can you talk a little bit about that? How does that factor into what you see in the disability process, but also how does it factor into representing people and sort of helping them navigate the process and trying to get a good, favorable decision?
Yeah, a very good question. I think that the way I would look at it is that, and really it's the same way I look at a case when somebody approaches me about representation, and that is, for me or for a judge, you have in your mind, what do you need to approve a case, let's say for back pain. So if you have a back pain case, you're generally going to want to see an MRI that's going to show some sort of pathology, a herniated disc, nerve root compression, stenosis. And so I believe in a judge's mind, if I'm going to pay a back pain case, there has to be many of these factors here. Maybe there are 10 factors and they've got to have 8 or 9 out of the 10. But I suspect for a judge who somebody comes in and says, I am in excruciating pain, it radiates into my legs, I can't sit, stand, walk for more than 5 or 10 minutes, but the MRI shows a mild bulging disc with no stenosis or nerve compression, that doesn't meet the model. So I think that some judges have a more of a looser model, other judges have a very tight model, but in their mind, they see back pain case, they say, this is what I'm looking for. They see cardiac case, this is what I'm looking for. And so if the person's complaints are out of proportion to what the objective evidence shows, they're not meeting the model, they're going to lose. So I think that's what I think that what's going on is that, because I think you have to do it. It's a shortcut. And again, when I'm looking at a case, I know that a 47-year-old with a bulging disc, but no nerve root compression, but complaints of, no feeling in his or her feet doesn't really match up. But a 56-year-old with a badly bulging disc and some nerve root compression, or severe stenosis, that does kind of match up. And the age factor,
Right.
goes along with that. But that's what I think. It's just there's a model in your head. Some judges have a very, very strict model, others a little bit looser, but that age factor is sort of the oil that lubricates it. So the more, the older you are, the easier it is to meet that model. But that's what I think is going on. And if I was a judge, that's probably the way I would do it as well.
Yeah, but I think too, you have to understand there's sort of a difference here too. You have the listings at step 3 where you sort of have these specific steps
Right.
that would make someone disabled. So they have you have a COPD and you have pulmonary function study requirements. But the reality is the listings are very difficult to meet. And so what happens is, let's just say, I remember, I won't say his name, but he's retired now, but a judge who used to say, well, Mr. Brown, the listings are what define the impairment. And if they don't meet the listing, then the Social Security Administration has said they're not disabled. That's a very harsh, strict understanding of the rules.
That's wrong. That's also wrong.
And I would argue that it's wrong, but that was his model.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you go to the other end, you may have someone that says, ALJ might say, well, honestly, the listings are so difficult that it's very difficult to meet. Those are for only the most extreme cases to shortcut the process. We're supposed to look at a bunch of different factors beyond that. But those judges are on opposite ends of sort of a continuum where one judge is saying, well, let's look at sort of everything. I would argue they're probably more accurate under the law. Mm-hmm. And another judge has taken a very strict position. But the point is, I think you're naive if you don't think judges come to the table with these presuppositions. We're running short on time. We're going to do another episode. I got a bunch of hearing stuff to talk about, but I do want to hit this point. How does knowing that impact you representing clients and trying to figure out what to do to help them win their cases?
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things. One is if you have a condition that is in the listings, so that's telling you Social Security recognizes this as a potentially disabling condition, as opposed to a condition not in the listing, like say fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue or some of these idiopathic conditions. It's going to be a lot more difficult. So I think that's one thing to really think about. And as far as the judge and the model, there are 3 different ways to win a disability case. You can meet a listing, you can meet a grid rule, you can argue functional capacity. And when you're in a hearing, you have to explain to the judge. If you have a judge who says, well, you got to meet a listing, you say, no, you don't. Under the law, there are 3 ways to win a case, and the listing is one of them, but there's a 5-step sequential process. Listing is step 3, but most cases are not at listing. So, you have to argue. That's what I think a good lawyer does, is to be able to say to the judge, no, your model is too strict, in a polite way, do it in a pre-hearing brief, and let the judge know you're not going to let them just kind of walk all over you with this ridiculously strict model. So, it's again, part of it really boils down to, quite frankly, the evidence. I mean, my feeling has always been the evidence is about 80% of whether you win or not. You may have the greatest lawyer ever, but the evidence isn't good, you're not going to win. Your testimony is probably going to be more if you screw it up, it'll disqualify you. It's not going to win a case most of the time. And the lawyer obviously showing he or she is prepared, not going to get walked over, that can make a difference. But I think it's just, you just have to have a clear idea. I guess I would say this: when I'm looking at a case, I want to have a clear idea of where I'm headed. It's like you can't get to a destination without a map. You have to have a clear idea. What is the theory of disability you're arguing? What do you need to prove with this judge? Research the judge. If the judge has a really, really strict model, you look at it and say, well, what can I do to satisfy this judge, to make this judge feel like, okay, this person met the model? Again, you do it in a pre-hearing brief, you do it in an oral argument, any number of ways to do it. But it can be a challenge when you have a judge who has a ridiculously tight, vision of what Social Security means by disability.
Yeah, I think it's also important to understand that your goal at the end of this map that you're in is to get your client approved. And I think it's being able to look at this is really as a factor how the judge considers a case. And so if you have a judge with, say, a lower approval rating who's denying more people, and you have a route to victory,
Yep.
Even though you can, I frequently would amend onset date. I disagree with it.
Absolutely. Onset date. Right. That's
But
a
at
good.
the end of the day, if we lose the case, I'm very blessed. I still get to go home and I have a roof over my head and I have food on the table and I can pay my power bill. But if that client loses, they may not have that luxury.
Right.
And so being able to go to them and say, look, yes, I understand this seems unfair, but this is where we are. This is the route we're on. And if we make this turn, we've got a good chance to get approved. And if we don't, we got a good shot to be denied. And we need to make sure we get to the right endpoint in the journey if we're going to be on it. So
Very true.
Very good. Well, we are out of time for episode 1. Thank you so much. We will continue our conversation. We're going to talk a lot in episode 2 about the hearing process itself, really specifics on what you can do inside that hearing to win your case. Episode 2 will show on my YouTube page. We will check the show notes for that. It's going to drop several days after this episode comes out. And so, Jonathan, look forward to continuing the conversation. Subscribe to this page, Jonathan's YouTube page, and we hope you come over and subscribe to mine as well. Thanks a lot.